Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your Kiwi Connection here, Kimo7, and today we have our first R9 280X Showdown. So I'm going to be putting Sapphire's Toxic 280X up against Gigabyte's Windforce 280X. So first, let's get into the size of these cards. So they're quite similar. The Toxic card comes in at 308mm long, whereas the Windforce is 285mm long, so slightly longer. The Toxic is 113mm wide to the Windforce's 126mm, so the Windforce is slightly wider. And then the Toxic is 41mm high to the Windforce's 38, so 3mm taller. Not much difference there. Obviously, these are both triple fan designs. Very good amount of heat pipes and fin array. And there we can see from the speed. So we got a 1150 megahertz boost clock on the Sapphire Toxic, which is getting up there for a factory overclock. And the Windforce is at 1100, so 50 megahertz more on the Sapphire card. But the bigger difference is with the memory speed. So the Toxic card from Sapphire has a memory speed of 6400 megahertz to the Windforce's 6000. So 400 is quite a bit. So that'll make a bit of a difference. So we'll get straight into the benchmarks then. You can see the difference. First up, we have Firmark. So the Windforce 280X, 23 frames per second. The Toxic, 24 frames per second. Then onto Unigine Valley on the Extreme HD preset. Windforce 280X, 46.2 frames per second. The Toxic, 48 frames per second. So 2 frames there for the Toxic. Unigine Heaven 4.0. This is a DirectX 11, everything maxed out. The Windforce 38.1. The Toxic 39.1 FPS. So that one was a bit closer. And again, Heaven 4.0. This time OpenGL. Same again, everything maxed out. 31 frames per second for the Windforce and 32.1 for the Sapphire Toxic 280X. So the Heaven ones were a bit closer. But now let's go into some actual games. So Tomb Raider. This is everything maxed out without VSync. Windforce 67.4. The Toxic 70 flat. So that's a bit better. It's about 2.5. Bioshock Infinite. Now once again, everything maxed out. This time the Windforce came in at 95.6 average frames per second. The Toxic 99.4 frames per second. So it's pretty obvious, you know, the reasoning behind this. Obviously the slightly faster GPU speed, 50 megahertz more and 400 megahertz more on the memory speed is going to help the Toxic a lot. So you're saying about, you know, 2, 3, 4 frames per second difference in those. Now, this is obviously always the interesting part, the temperatures. Because those speeds are fine, but a lot of people overclock, so it only matters how cool the card already is. Now, in Firmark, which runs for my settings on it, 4 times MSAA, this runs for 15 minutes, and I take the highest temperature in this time. Now, this is worse than anything any game would ever throw at it, so just keep that in mind. So the Windforce, it went up to 76 degrees max, and that was at 90% fan speed. So it was going pretty hard. Now keep in mind that these are not 290s. They're good till about 85. That's what I found. But a lot of people say that anything over 80 is starting to get a bit dodgy. But their thermal limit is 85. So keep that in mind. Now, the Toxic 280X. Same thing in Fermark. It went to 73, so 3 degrees less, but the difference is the fan speed. I only saw a maximum of 64% on the Toxic compared to the 90% of the Windforce. So a lot less fan speed and less heat. I also looked for the maximum temperature in Unigine Heaven, and on the Windforce it went up to 70 degrees centigrade. The Toxic, 68. So seeing it's a bit better on the Toxic, but I can't stress the point enough that the fan speeds aren't getting that high on the Toxic during this time. Which means if you are going to overclock these cards, which a lot of people do, you've got a lot more headroom then to run a very aggressive fan curve, where that Windforce is pretty almost maxing out its fans already, just trying to keep it cool. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, obviously with that 90% fan speed there was a lot of noise, but that was just in Fermark. In the other tests it didn't get up to anywhere near that high. So noise-wise, these cards were pretty similar, but I'll let you decide for yourself. So here is the Windforce at idle. And here is the Toxic at idle. Now, before I go into showing you the load, let me tell you one thing, the one big thing I didn't like about this Sapphire card, the one big con with it. They have a semi-notorious reputation for making rattling noises, and the plastic shrouding around the fans rattling, and some of them do it, some of them don't. A lot of people had that on the Tri-X. The one I have is fine, it doesn't do that. But this Toxic card did. So keep that in mind, and it's not for all of them. I think it's just this one, but quite a few of them have done it. If you look on YouTube, there's a few people who have complained about post up videos. So here is the Windforce at load. This is during the Unigine Valley benchmark. And now the Toxic card making the bad rattling sound once again in the Unigine Valley benchmark. So not a very good noise. I can also say as well, before even the fans ramp up, there's a little bit more coil whine from the Sapphire card, although again that varies from card to card, so take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, so overall, what do I think? Now, and what do I recommend is the main thing. I would have to say the Toxic card from Sapphire. Yes, my one rattled, and yours might as well, but you can always take it back and get another one if that's the case. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, and a few people have RMA'd them just for that reason, because it is annoying. The coil whine, you can't, I don't think you can actually RMA for that reason, but it doesn't matter too much. You can't really hear it too badly. So the whole noise thing is, you know, it's not really a big deal, and your card probably won't do it. I'm sure 90% of them are fine. Just I got unlucky, I suppose. But the Toxic looks better, it has a backplate, it runs cooler at lower fan speed, and it runs faster if you're not going to overclock it by about, you know, say average 2 to 3 frames faster, which isn't much, but you know, it's something. And if you're going to overclock, then I just have to recommend the Toxic, because it's just the cooler running card. You'll have more headroom. So that's going to end this video. I was impressed with both of these cards, and I do like these 280Xs. They come in at a good price point, and they do deliver pretty good performance. So that's going to end this video. Next up, we're going to be putting up the DirectC 280X from Asus up against Gigabyte's Windforce 280X and see if the Gigabyte card can come out on top against that one. Anyways, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.